And with that, it just remains for me to introduce our final session of the afternoon, our exclusive panel hosted by Diane Young, CEO of The Drum.
Let's start off with our questions. Emer, I'm going to go to you first. Oftentimes, companies are very focused on hiring. There's a lot of education around hiring more inclusively and so on. But what about after hiring, when people join the company? What about retention? How's that viewed at HubSpot? And do you prioritize hiring over retention, or the other way around? How do you balance it all out?
That's such a good question, and I'm actually so happy that you asked that. It's definitely something that we think about, Diane, and honestly, I would encourage every company to also think about it. I mean, I think in reality, recruiting talent and hiring employees from underrepresented groups is only the first step. And what so many companies face, and actually a blind spot for so many organizations, is not focusing enough on retention of those employees. And this concept, you may have heard it, of a leaky funnel. It's real, where you have great inclusive hiring practices, you recruit diverse talent, but you actually don't spend enough time nurturing and developing that talent and creating an environment where that talent really can thrive and they feel like they belong. And so hiring might be great, but you will never make sustained change. And it's really focusing on that word sustained, because your overall representation won't change, your attrition will be too high. And honestly, that's doing that talent a disservice.
I think, and I think I was nodding sagely along about the belonging question as well, but I think my pet peeve, as it were, is that people think it's an HR responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. And I knew that when we were structuring our diversity, inclusion and belonging strategy a couple of years ago, the first iteration, that we were going to really need to nail that part. So we actually broke ours into 4 pillars. So it's people and culture, which everyone looks to being the obvious, but then of equal importance, our work is the 3rd pillar and our clients is the 4th pillar. And that was a very deliberate move to place emphasis on the whole business and not just HR. And then we quickly pulled together our inclusion board, and that's made up of each network lead, but also their exec sponsor too.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when I think about market personalization, I think it is, as you mentioned, so important for all the reasons you mentioned, ensuring that there is the right market to market per market strategy aligned with, I think, the why is fundamental. So what I mean by this is it's not just enough to develop strategies based on the demographics of a market. There needs to be, I think, communication within organizations that informs on the basis of the varying strategies with the potential for something that might be more globally aligned as a focus area. So perhaps that's, the largest diversity barrier across the markets to tackle. So from an OK Mentor perspective, we're laser focused on ethnic diversity. And while in different markets, we have mentees that are joining our programs from all over the world, and some of the parts of the world that they come from, D&I looks totally different. However, we're leading with ethnic diversity. We're clear about the why, because within the mentee population, we don't see a lot of ethnic diversity. So we have to really focus our attention on growing that element of it. And that's something that's easy to kind of create and easy to kind of segment what that looks like in India and the mentees that come from a different market than like the UK. But it's all about, I think, having those distinct strategies for sure, but also making sure that you're educating the full organization and everyone that's a part of that as to the why and to why different priorities exist.
And I agree. If it's embedded in your culture, then you can't you can't stop everything from working. And at Barclays, we're everything is embedded from the top down and the bottom up. We have for all our D&I pillars, from kind of gender to LGBT plus, etc. We have executive sponsors for each of those pillars, and our CEO Jez is our executive sponsor for our gender agenda. So that just shows how serious kind of as a company we're taking things. And then we have our colleague diversity networks, which are embedded globally around the business, and our colleagues really kind of play an active role in kind of shaping the kind of the events, the kind of workshops, the speakers, just the kind of energy of those diversity networks around the business. And that hasn't stopped. In fact, I've been so impressed with how they've managed to pivot during this time of with lockdown and kind of moving things to a virtual environment. And instead of kind of, they've all thrived. Our colleague diversity networks actually are at an all-time high in terms of membership. So that just goes to show that D&I is definitely not on the back burner.